So now we're back at the National Renewable Energy Lab, where they're using biomass to create energy. Right here, we have the leaves, stalks, and stems of corn from Wisconsin. They use this, they grind it up to create this mush right here that smells just like molasses. This will then be further refined down into ethanol, which is a fuel.
In this facility, the National Renewable Energy Lab is learning to make ethanol, which can be used as a fuel for cars and trucks, from the parts of the plant that you don't eat. In other words, if you're talking about corn, ethanol today is made from the corn kernels. What we're learning to do is make ethanol from the stalks, the stems, the leaves, the cobs, the part of the corn that people and animals don't eat. The importance of that is so that we don't have a fuel versus food controversy. We take those, grind them up, process them with heat, pressure, steam, and make a goo. That goo then is fermented. The sugars are starting to release from that goo, and it's fermented into an ethanol, and that ethanol can then be burned in an automobile engine. We're learning to do that so that we will have an alternative fuel to petroleum-based fuels, gasoline and diesel fuel. Those fuels put carbon into the atmosphere when they're burned, and that carbon is carbon that has been underground for millions of years, now being put back in the atmosphere. The ethanol that we make also puts a little carbon into the atmosphere, but that's carbon that was just in the corn plant before it was harvested and will be absorbed then back into the corn plants that'll grow again next spring. So in the life cycle, almost no carbon is going into the atmosphere. The importance of this is that the carbon that goes into the atmosphere has been linked with climate change and global warming.
As temperatures rise, ice melts, and also the ocean expands due to heating. This causes sea level to rise. As a rule of thumb, 1 degree centigrade of average global temperature rise equates to 1 meter of sea level rise. In places like Florida, 1 meter of sea level rise would have waters encroach inland by miles. Just think about the cities that are on the coast. Next, we're going to go to Greenland. Greenland is a place that could potentially affect coastlines all over the planet. Why? Because it's an island covered in ice, up to miles thick. So, if the ice on Greenland were to melt, how much would sea level rise? How much temperature would it take to melt the entire Greenland ice sheet? Let's see if we can get to the bottom of some of these questions. There's this rock on the hill, right back there. How did that rock get there? A long time ago, when glaciers sat on top of this hill, they were rolling over, eroding, and then they began to thaw, they began to melt as temperatures warmed. And the glaciers retreated and left that rock behind. So right now we're looking at a rock that has evidence of glaciers riding over it 20,000 years ago. You can see little striations in this rock where the glacier actually had rocks frozen in the bottom of it and then scoured out these rocks and rounded them out to make them look like whales. And you can tell that the glacier went in this direction because as the glacier rode along, it plucked out rocks on the back side of these whalebacks. It froze onto the rocks and just pulled them out and pulled them down towards the harbor. So right now we're outside of the town of Kangerlussuaq, or Kanger, and we're in a region that's been affected by glaciers. You can see it in the landscape all around you, but you can also see it in smaller areas where you have boulders that are piled up, just like this. They're unsorted, meaning that they have different sizes. They go from sand all the way up to large boulders. This is evidence of a cooler period when glaciers moved forward and did the bulldozing. This was the Little Ice Age that happened a couple hundred years ago. If you take a broader look at the landscape, you could see that there was a glaciation that actually overtook all of the landscape. Right now we're looking at a landscape that's evidence of glaciation on the biggest of scales. The hills behind me are rounded by a glacier, an ice cap that ran over this whole area 20,000 years ago. There might have been a kilometer of ice on top of this whole area and just ground it down and rounded it over into what we see today. This is happening much further up valley where there is an ice cap. Coming to the Greenland ice sheet is ideal for trying to understand how climates have changed in the past and how they're changing in the present. Right now we're on about 2 miles of ice and snow. Snow builds one year upon the next and the next because it's so cold here. The deepest snow is converted into ice because of the pressure of the ice and snow above. Scientists drill down through these layers all the way to bedrock, all 2 miles, extracting snow and ice as they go. They look at the chemical constituents within these ice cores to see what climates were like long ago and how quickly climates change.
So that from ice coring science, we know that climate can change in less than 10 years. That's a brand new thought in our generation. Before that, it was not realized at all, and that came from ice coring science. Another really important thing that has come from ice coring science is the ability to retrieve the atmospheric composition of the past. So that the reason we know now that our CO2 in the atmosphere is higher than it's been in over 600,000 years is from ice coring science.
Well, we're going to go back out to the study site and do some more core drilling and marking off, sections, weighing them, and getting them all ready to get bagged up to be sent back.
See the little teeth that are grabbing the core, and the cutters that cut. So the core goes inside, and the chips that are produced during the cutting process go inside of those plates. So we have two barrels, one inside another.
Totally. It's our baby. It's, yeah, you want to take really good care of it and pay attention to every little movement it makes. And actually making sure the cable is feeding down at a good rate so that there's not too much weight hanging on the bit or pushing down on the ice, because you want gravity to pull it down so it's a straight hole. You don't want to go skewing off.
Well, there are certain parts of your body that lose heat or gain heat, so I guess the boots are one of the most important because of condensation that occurs. If you have a boot that provides enough space, then you can walk whole day and your socks can stay dry and you can stay warm. Too tight boots or boots that don't provide enough space for layering, well, the results are discomfort.
There's change. The change is happening. And we know ways to make the change not happen so fast. And we know the change is detrimental to most societies in the world. Animals, humans, fish, everything. So why not do everything we can to help make it not change? You know, basic energy. How much energy do you really need to use in it every day? But I also know that I feel good because I feel like I'm a part of what possibly could become a solution.
The drilling efforts that we saw, headed by Mary Albert and Jeff Severinghaus, hoisted up between 100 and 200 meters of snow and fern. Fern is compressed snow and feels a lot like heavy styrofoam. It was a time of experimenting with a new drill and to sample air within pockets between snow crystals. A handful of efforts have drilled all the way to the bottom of the ice sheet, miles of ice. To learn more about deep drilling, we're going to step quickly off the ice sheet to talk to Jim White, another ice core scientist.
One of the best ways that we have for studying climate of the past, which is critical for understanding climate of the future, is through the use of ice cores. Ice is a wonderful collector of information. Dust falls from the atmosphere on it. That dust came from somewhere, so that tells you about atmospheric circulation. Initially, we measured these stable isotope ratios that tell us about temperature and some dust and other things. In the 70s and 80s, we learned how to take air out of an ice core. And when that occurred, then suddenly we had greenhouse gases. We had carbon dioxide. We had methane. We had nitrous oxide. We could see that relationship between levels of CO2 and temperature on this planet. That is, those two things are in lockstep. I like to say they're handcuffed together. And ice cores told us that. Today, we're taking that even further. We're measuring isotopic composition of greenhouse gases, which is to say we can now not only say that the greenhouse gases increased, but we can say whether that came out of the ocean, or whether that came out of the biosphere, or went into the ocean, or went into the land plants. So there's a lot more we're learning about how the planet used to work, and therefore a lot more we're understanding about how it will work in the future. But in Greenland, we can see year by year what's going on 40,000 years ago. It is terribly helpful to know that, for example, you can have climate changes of up to 10 degrees Celsius, that's 18 degrees Fahrenheit, in a matter of 50 years, so less than a human lifetime. Now, how do you get these big changes occurring in short periods of time? That occurs because our climate system has thresholds, or modes. And when we cross a threshold, boom, things change. It's a non-linear process is what we call it. And we wouldn't know that if we just looked at the last 10 or 12,000 years. We need that bigger picture to say, yes, our climate is not a simple, I push and it gives a little, I push twice and it gives twice kind of system. It's I push once, nothing happens. I push again, nothing happens. I push one more time and boom, off it goes to some new state.